everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Phil.
And I'm Pat.
And today we have a guest in our studio. We're joined by John, one of our team members. John has been a long-standing member of the team. He's been playing Airsoft for a really long time, and he's particularly interested in World War II impressions. We have a video where you can actually see his World War II Canadian paratroop impression. We go through all the different aspects of the kit, but we wanted to have a conversation with him today specifically about what it's like doing an impression, what it's like being a reenactor in Airsoft, utilizing Airsoft as a method or a way to reenact, and some of the sort of stories and challenges he's had along the way in building his impression.
This sort of comes out of us talking a lot and him convincing me to do a World War II kit and a World War II impression along with him. He, like myself, is a historian by sort of training, and he's perhaps a bigger nerd than I am about something, which is astounding to me.
So, John, I remember the first time you came out to an Airsoft game, you were out with your dad, you were quite young at the time. He had a 101st Airborne kit, you had something pretty similar. How did that start for you?
Well, yeah, referring back to that, Dad was trying to go for the easy company because he watched Band of Brothers, and like many reenactors who watch Band of Brothers, they want to do para.
I mean, hey man, I watched it for the first time recently, and I want to do para now.
Yeah, because it looks boss. But no, anyways, I was dressed up in old Canadian Forces olive drab cotton uniform, and just garbo really.
Hey, I mean, what you can get is what you can get.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely on a budget, but over time, since I saw Dad out in it, I kept watching Band of Brothers. I finally convinced him to buy me a set of M42 reinforced the parachutist uniform for D-Day for the 101st Airborne, because I wanted to be a member of Easy Company, because, why not? If I'm not going to make the training, but I can get the impression by having the kit.
So, actually, you just raised a good point. Like, there is a difference as well between kit and impression,
Definitely,
right?
Yeah.
Like, just because you have the kit doesn't mean you have an impression, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of like this weird backwards way of looking at it, but you can buy all this kit, but if your kit isn't done right, or doesn't look right and isn't assembled right, your impression's not going to be good. It takes time to learn the kit. So the kit, in this sense, is every individual piece of equipment. So, like, if we're going to refer back to the 101st Airborne, it's the M42 reinforced jump jacket and trousers. That's 2 bits of kit that will ultimately lead to your impression being either good or bad. Depends on where you get it and how you treat it and what you do with it.
So I know from talking to you about this and like trying to figure out what I'm going to buy that sort of specific places are good and bad for buying your...
Definitely. Every reenactor will say like original is better. This is true in some regard. If you're doing a German reenactment, don't wear originals out to Airsoft or a reenactment event because they're ludicrously expensive. Rightly so, because they have this whole stigma associated with them that no other nation has. So there are these different vendors out there, like What Price Glory, At the Front, Soldier of Fortune. Reenactors go to these stores to buy their bits for their kit.
I know in your impression video, you specifically talk about certain retailers producing certain things better than others. So It's not like there's going to be one place that's better than everybody else,
Definitely. Right? But, I mean, that said, there are some really good vendors, like At the Front. If you're doing, like, a U.S. impression, you're generally going to want to buy your kit from At the Front. Where there's another very good vendor called World War II Impressions, who specifies in, like, small batches of very high quality, like, uniforms, like, both, like, service dress and combat dress, which is something, it's another side of reenactment that's not really applicable to Airsoft. You're not going to go out and dress blues and shoot people with a Thompson or something like that.
Right, of course.
We can't actually record my wallet screaming, but I promise that it is.
Yeah. So you have all kinds of resources that are available for your impressions, like to acquire different pieces of kit, some very specific pieces, some more, broader pieces like, your jacket, but very specific stuff as well. Like I remember you showed us like a gammon bomb that was made, like that's a very specific reproduction of an item that you're going to want to carry. But I guess before we dive into that, I really want to understand a bit more about what made you want to go from just wearing a World War II kit, so wearing this 101st Airborne kit that you had, to wanting to do an impression? What was going through your head then?
Well, I was probably like 16 or so when I got the 101st kit, and I was really naive about the whole thing. Like, I thought like that was a really good impression. Like that, honestly, I didn't even consider it an impression at the time. I didn't know the difference between it. I just thought I was a World War II parachutist. Very naive of me to think that, but that's what a 16-year-old would think about who's like a Second World War nut like myself. But there was a transition with my deepening of history, like, and my appreciation for it as well, that kind of shifted my interest into how I wanted to be perceived in the reenactment community. I strive for perfection, and my 101st kit I realized wasn't going to be perfect, and I started to learn that everybody and their dog kind of goes out and does 101st Airborne if they're being an American. I mean, it's one of those weird things, and it's become a meme inside the reenactment community.
I think Band of Brothers is really cool. Like,
definitely. But beyond that, you see everyone in a M42 uniform and a parachutist impression, like 95% of the time, they're gonna be easy company. So it's part of that shifted my interest, and I realized I didn't really want to be associated with that crowd. So I turned my attention to. I've always had a strong interest in the British Army, and being that Newfoundland at the time was part of the British Empire, it's like, oh, well, British kit, that's cool. Canadian kit's pretty well the exact same. So after watching A Bridge Too Far, watching the 1st Airborne at Arnhem, and 101st and 82nd, I took a keen liking to the 1st Airborne at Arnhem, the British forces that were trapped there. And I looked at that kit and that uniform, and I was like, that's it. That's the bee's knees.
It's just because he wanted to dress up like Sean Connery, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that. I'm just missing the Windac, but I can easily acquire that. But yeah, I turned my attention to this facet of reenactment that some people do. It's not as popular as Easy Company, but I think it's cool. So
it's awesome, in my opinion.
And I started to do some research on it. I was like, were there any Canadian involvement on a large scale during Market Garden? And I found that there really wasn't. There was a few can loan officers there that were with the British. So I kind of turned my attention to what were the Canadian Airborne doing. And because they're, by and large, they're not represented on the same scale as like a general infantry soldier, like Tommy from the Canadian Army was during the Second World War. Like they're not...
Juno Beach and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Or like Sword and...
I mean, we make less movies about that than do the Brits or the US, right?
Exactly. And that's like a really big contributing factor to the popularity of an impression that you see on the field. So like Saving Private Ryan, 2nd Ranger Battalion, super popular. Band of Brothers, Easy Company. Bridge Too Far, 1st Airborne. There's not really anything specific about the 6th Airborne, which the Canadian Airborne was attached to during the Second World War.
And I mean, we know that tons of people get into sort of the study of history in a more academic sense through popular history, right?
Definitely.
Like, Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers are great gateways into learning more about World War II in a whole bunch of different ways.
Definitely.
I know this is sort of a dirty word in the reenactment community, but like, how do you move from what, to my mind, is sort of, almost, cosplaying a 101st?
I mean, it's totally cosplay. I mean, there's really no difference except what you want to get out of it. I guess the difference between cosplay and reenacting is, well, you know what? There really isn't that big of a difference between the two of them. And I know that, and it's kind of like this meme. It's just, I've always seen this meme on one of the Facebook pages I'm part of that say, like, we're just cosplay with guns. And I'm like, you're not wrong.
That accurately describes Airsoft as well a lot of the time. Or
Yeah.
at least Fashion Soft, which Phil and I have previously admitted is definitely a part of how we do.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we talked about this before. There's a piece around, like, yeah, you want to do like a screen accurate cosplay. There's a lot of research that goes into that. I think the same thing is true, even more so when it comes to impressions, because if you just watch Band of Brothers, and I'm not sure, and we can talk about this in a second, but if you watch Band of Brothers and you're like, yeah, I want to do 101st Airborne kit, and you just watch the show and then build your kit, firstly, you can only see what you can see on the screen.
Definitely.
in order for you to do an actual impression, you need to capture everything else about that kit that you might not be able to see.
Yeah,
and that's assuming they all made the right decisions too.
Definitely.
They could have made mistakes because maybe they didn't have a jump boot that fits, so they had to give him a double buckle. Anything is possible. It's not a primary source. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not a primary source.
Exactly.
Right?
That's the big dividing factor. You have the people that watch Band of Brothers, Bridge Too Far, Saving Private Ryan, see what the guys are wearing, understand what they're wearing, and go out and buy that. Whereas you get this kind of division between like hardcore reenactors and cosplay reenactors, I suppose, is one way to phrase it. Hardcore reenactors, which obviously I am definitely a member of. I fall into that category quite easily.
Well, I mean, you carried, what, 50, 60 pounds of kit up to the photo shoot that we did a couple weeks ago?
Well, yeah. I mean, I wore what was required of the impression, and I'm not gonna not wear it.
But, like, for airsoft purposes, you'll often get people going, well, I don't need to carry all of this weight to play airsoft in. So, obviously, that's a difference.
For me, I use airsoft as a means to reenact because the reenactment community here is non-existent for what I want to do. So, by going out with 2 dummy bread magazines in my pouch, a gammon bomb in my pocket, a number 36 mils bomb in my other pocket, and a small pack full of rations, tea ration included, I get some semblance of what the experience was like for the ordinary person that was wearing this kit during that time, under somewhat of the same stressors that they might have been under. It's different that's where airsoft differs from reenacting, and I think that's why airsoft is, I think, a better means to reenact than blank fire, because there's no threat of getting hit, so you don't have that like adrenaline rush that you get on a reenactment battlefield. I don't know. I've never been part of one, so I can't really say if that's true or not, but that's my perception of it. But in the airsoft field, as everyone that's listening knows, when you're taking fire, your heart skips a beat that first time that round comes over. So
Definitely.
I mean, you get that semblance of that micro adrenaline rush. Obviously, it's not the same as an 8mm Mauser round coming at you, but
we hope.
yeah. But I mean that adrenaline is still there, and like the constrictions that you have trying to react to that fire from the kit is accurate. So if someone's shooting at you with a Kar 98K that's doing a German impression from across the field, your reaction time is not going to be the same as if there's BBs coming at you and there's some sort of stakes on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does provide, I guess, the additional motivation.
Definitely. So you learn the ins and outs of the kit better, I think, in an airsoft setting than you do like in a mock battle or a stage battle. I mean, that's just one of the benefits of airsoft, I think, to the reenacting community. Not a lot of reenactors see eye to eye on that subject. It's very divisive. A lot of people say, like, airsoft is just cosplay. It doesn't hold any merit because there's this stigma with airsoft players that they don't really want to go out and spend $2,000 on an impression, whereas a reenactor who does a mock battle with a period correct rifle, I mean, that's one of the biggest differences, the period rifle.
But I mean, there's also the reality that we live in Canada where conducting mock battle with a blank firing rifle is probably very difficult to get access to, if not just strictly impossible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know the legality surrounding those things because I'm not a firearms owner, but it's something I've looked into briefly, not enough to have any opinion of merit, so...
Well, I know certainly in Canada you can't legally own a 30mm machine gun, which you certainly can own in several parts of the States, so like that's going to cause a difference.
Definitely.
Minimally.
Definitely. But that's just my perception of how airsoft is a good means to reenact. It just requires dedication, I think, and a lot of the stigma that surrounds airsoft is, not to harp on my dad, but he's kind of like the embodiment of that, I think. He just sees the kit that was used on the screen for the Band of Brothers 101st impression, and he just cobbles that together and he calls it a day. Like, where I strive to go that extra step further, where I have that same reinforced jump suit that I have. I CC2'd it, which is accurate to what the boys would have actually done, but I use paraffin wax, so I waxed my uniform just to give it that aesthetically different look that is accurate in period photographs and primary sources that I use.
I think you're coming up on one of the key themes that we've talked about in this podcast a lot, which is that airsoft is different things to everybody,
Definitely.
right? And so your dad wears that kit because he wants to feel like he's, the hero in his sort of novel in his head, or the hero in his TV show on the field. And so for him, just putting on the kit, that's good enough. And he's like, yeah, I feel good.
Yeah.
And then you have people who are not going to care at all about the kit, and they're wearing their yellow hoodie with their HPA gun, running around the field with like a plushy whale dangling off their gun, whatever that is. Yeah. And then you've got yourself, who's obviously very interested in the impression. And it's a hobby, right? For all of us, airsoft is a hobby, and it will be different things. But that being said, there is something that you can get in terms of impression from airsoft, whether or not the community agrees with you. Mm-hmm. The ultimate goal of impression is really to get sort of a window into that period, right?
Definitely.
And whether or you're shooting blank firing guns or you're shooting airsoft guns, you can still get that perspective,
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah, so it becomes sort of a living history, or even maybe an experimental archaeology kind of thing.
Yep. That's become a bit of a meme inside the reenactment community as well. They don't really see the importance of reenacting. They just kind of see it as a hobby, or I come at it a bit differently. Like, this is one of the most important aspects to public history, is living history, or experimental archaeology, which is ultimately what reenacting is, I think, personally.
How so?
Well, in the community that we play with, I'm the only reenactor that goes out in a period kit and with the full 9 yards and does the impression. Nobody there has any understanding or concept of what I'm wearing. So they look at me and they see, oh, this guy's wearing something that's very intense.
That's definitely true.
What is that? You have a rope? Why do you have a rope? They start asking me questions like, I like your helmet. What kind of helmet is that? Where'd you get that smock? Is there anything in your backpack there? Like, where do you keep your magazines? And I see you have hobnails on your boots. Like, how's that like to walk on? Like,
shitty.
Yeah. Like, are you wearing all wool? Yeah.
How are you not dead in this 30-degree weather?
Exactly. And so, like, from that perspective, airsoft, and, well, this is from my perspective, but I don't have a reenactment community here that does mock battles or anything like that, or living history shows. So airsoft is that means to me to get the message out of, all right, this is what a Canadian paratrooper had issued to them for D-Day. And this is, I think, the perfect encapsulation of that. I don't think there's anything here that's missing, really, that's of significance importance that I have to go out and buy. But I have enough of a knowledge behind it to wear the kit accurately and convey the information in an, I guess, concise means to get the message across of this is what it was like to people that would have otherwise not known.
And I guess it serves to generate curiosity, right? Like, people definitely look at you and go, okay, that's a really different airsoft kit, and ask you questions because of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that we had talked about previously, and I think is also very important, if you've listened to this podcast, we've spent a lot of time explaining to our listeners and our viewers on YouTube why we wear the things that we do, why we carry our sidearms where we carry them, why we run the AGs we do, why we prefer a chest rig to a plate carrier, and vice versa. And what we are doing in telling you all this information is we're giving you a glimpse in sort of our decision-making process. That's not something you can do with someone who is deceased. Right? Yeah. Once someone has passed away, you can't then ask them, hey, I noticed that you were wearing this. Why were you doing that? So the choices that we make, otherwise known as our agency as people, by reenacting and doing an impression kit, you can sort of get a window into those decisions as well, right?
Definitely. The agency is not there in reenacting because the decisions that you have to make are made for you. So that agency is lost. What you can do is you can wear and store things that might not have been issued to everyone. So not everybody in the section would have had a gammon bomb. So my impression has one, and I think it's great for it because it shows that, if there was another person doing the Canadian Airborne, they would not have that bit of kit. And we would say, like, this is just the way they differ. Their agencies differ. Like, he wants to have additional things like a gammon bomb, a hand grenade. And this fella doesn't want to have that. He wants to have a 303 Lee Enfield, whereas I want to have a Sten. So you get those little bits of agency that kind of show off the wider scope of the logistics, I suppose, of the Second World War in terms of the Canadian Airborne.
And I mean, one has to imagine that as you're sort of wearing this kit and putting it together and putting on and using it in the field, you're probably going to be thinking, okay, so I'm starting to figure out why these guys in these primary source photos that we have are wearing this piece of kit the way they are.
Yeah.
Because it's more effective than wearing it sort of the way I thought I would wear it when I first strapped it on.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point. And I don't think it's something that has been really addressed, to my knowledge, in terms of reenacting. I would recommend to anyone that wants to start out, wear your kit by the book. So go on, if you're doing British or Canadian, go on karkiweb.com, look up the manuals for the 37 pattern equipment, do it by the book. Then look at period photographs. Once you have the experience of having that out in the field with the wool uniform on, once that's done, look at it and look at original photographs of the fellows, see if there's any differences from the specific unit that you want to reenact. So I'm trying to get Pat on the train now doing 83rd U.S. Infantry impression late war. And you can see, like, some people from period photographs have their shovels not in their carriers. They have it kind of strapped on their harness, like on the back of their 1928 cartridge belt, sorry. That's done specifically because of that person's agency. And I know, because I've worn my entrenching tool out in the field, it's not comfortable. That would be a more beneficial spot to have it, and I have the historical
evidence.
Yeah, evidence to support that shovel being in that position for this time period that I'm reenacting.
And so it's a practicum of just, you look at it and go, all right, I've worn this in the field. It's uncomfortable. It kind of sucks. I can see why that guy's carrying it somewhere different.
Exactly, and I can accurately do that. And when people ask me, I can refer to them at, here's a YouTube video that's 18 minutes long. At the 6-minute, 42-second mark, there's a fella doing this. And that gives me justification to be able to carry my equipment the way I have.
So you start off playing Airsoft, wearing the kit that you had from just watching the show.
Yep.
Then you start deep diving into what the kit was supposed to do, looking at the different manuals, figuring out how it was supposed to be worn, what the individual pieces were, all the inside pieces, like you said, your tea ration, the food you're carrying, or your pay book. That if you guys watch the World War II video, you can see a lot of the inside of John's kit. So you're doing all of this stuff, and you're also getting a glimpse into the way people were thinking at the time, right, and why they made the decisions that they did, or if they didn't have a choice in what they carried, why they carried it the particular way because it was uncomfortable or whatever else. So you're doing all of this stuff and you're learning in a very direct way, you're learning about history. What are some of the challenges that you've had getting this kit together and really putting off the impression that you wanted to put off?
Oh boy, where do I start? I have made so many mistakes with this impression that's not even funny. Like, I'm very frugal with my money, and I like to buy once and cry once. I've definitely not done that here in this particular instance. I remember the first thing I did, I didn't do any research. I just did aesthetics only, and I saw one of the characteristic things of a British airborne soldier was the Denison smock. At the time, I didn't know that there was different variants of it during the war, and different variants came about at different times. So I went on Soldier of Fortune 3 or 4 years ago, and I bought a second pattern Denison smock because I wanted to do a D-Day Canadian Airborne impression. Turns out the second pattern Denison smock was not used on a wide scale. That, therefore, does not give me the justification to go out and wear it and say it's accurate. So right out of the gate, I just spent $150, and I bought something that was completely incorrect. It would have been fine if I was doing Operation Varsity in March of 1945, but not for June 1944. So, I mean, that rendered my impression inaccurate right out of the gate for what I set out to do. Other than that, it's trying to just... I remember the first bit of kit I bought for my British impression was denim trousers. Denim was not used on a large-scale combat role for the... Especially, it was non-existent in the airborne realm, but in the general infantry, it was used on a minor scale with auxiliary troops. And it's not accurate to the impression, so that, I mean, right out of the gate, as soon as I got... The first thing I bought for my Canadian impression was incorrect. So that was just before I wanted to do airborne. I just wanted to do British or Canadian, whatever. So right out of the gate, I was like, wool's not going to be comfortable. It's cheaper to buy the denim. I'm just going to buy the denim and call it a day. No dice. Those are two good examples, I think, that illustrate that you need to do research beforehand, and that's the biggest thing that any reenactor will tell you, is research is key. Like I said, refer to the manuals first, then go to wear it out in the field, and yeah, use period photographs and manuals to get an understanding of what the kit is. use the manual to assemble it, go out in the field with it factory setting, I suppose, and then refer to the original photographs and look at how they actually properly carried it.
So you actually said, you've made some mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because I'm trying to understand what is the impact of actually making a mistake. Aside from, okay, so yeah, absolutely, you waste your money because it's not the right piece of kit.
Yeah.
But like, what is the impact? Like, people are going to roast you because you have the wrong piece of kit on?
Oh my god, yes. If I posted my impression of the second pattern Denison smock, if that was the only inaccuracy, I would be chewed out for it. It's so funny to say, but it's so true. Like, by that one piece of kit not being correct and being so visible, you put off the notion that you don't know what you're doing. And obviously, you want to look like you know what you're doing after spending like $2,000 on an impression. So
yeah, so it's really hard to overstate how much people need to take their time and research and make sure they're getting the right piece. Like, good enough is not good enough.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. But it's that understanding and making those mistakes forces you to learn and understand the kit in a better way that you wouldn't have understood prior. So if I just thought the second pattern Denison smock was perfect and kosher, I wouldn't have been down this rabbit hole of researching Denisons, like, and finding who makes the best and what makes them the best. What's the difference between all the various patterns, right, and up until MTP. So mistakes, I think, are so vital in everything, really. I mean, that's the only way you learn from them. So, like I said, I went down this rabbit hole now because I made this one mistake. And you need to make these mistakes in order to learn the kit. And that's the most important thing, I think. Learning and understanding the kit and being able to explain that kit to either airsofters, the general public, or other reenactors. Or veterans, even.
So it's fair to say then that like making mistakes is part of the process and the people shouldn't necessarily be discouraged because they bought the wrong pattern of hat.
Definitely. It's when it becomes an issue is when you keep doing it and not accepting the advice or criticism. So a big meme we're going around with the U.S. impression kits is that you wear a white T-shirt or you have a cigar, like, that's a farb. And a farb is far from correct. So that's just slang for someone that doesn't know what they're doing. It's when you keep repeating these same minor things over and over again and not taking this criticism that your impression starts to falter and you lose credibility.
Yeah, and I mean, it's okay if you want to be a farb and
Definitely.
You're not trying to put off an impression. Yeah. You're just like your dad. Like, you're just wearing what you think is cool and you look great doing it. And I remember your dad, like, rocking a Garand and a cigar in his mouth on the field, scaring some kids. Like, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's hilarious. Yeah. But at the same time, if he was saying not just, I'm having fun, but this is an accurate impression, then that's just not the case, right? Yeah. That's not true.
Yeah. Like, he put minimal effort into researching that kit and understanding that kit. I was the same way for like 3 years of having my kit. I didn't know that there was a difference between belts. I didn't know there was a wool undershirt that goes underneath the M42. I didn't even know what arm the badge went on, like the shoulder flash. So like,
and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, definitely.
But I think it would be kind of like saying, well, I've watched all the episodes of House MD, and I can explain to you how surgery is performed. Yeah. Well, that's just not true, right? There's a lot of context that you need to research and understand. It doesn't make you a doctor just because you watch all the episodes of Scrubs, right?
Definitely.
But I mean, it does, I think, mean that there's room in Airsoft for people who just sort of want to dress up in a less correct paratrooper kit and have a laugh.
Yeah.
Right? As long as they're not going, well, this is my recreation.
It might be just their interpretation of how the kit's assembled. Going back to it's just surface level reenacting. It's just visual. You're just saying, I like the way that looks. I'm actually going to buy that and not do anything else with it.
I think a lot of airsofters do that. Like, they watch Active Valor on Netflix and they're like, that looks cool, I'm going to do that. But they don't take the time to understand why those SEALs are wearing what they're wearing, or what's maybe inside. Like, your dog tags is an obvious one that you can't see, but they're all wearing them. Are you wearing them? Probably not, because, well, it's just Airsoft. Well, that's fine. But if you're trying to do an impression of a particular time period, whether that's World War II or we talked about, Vietnam, Korean War, etc., there's a lot that goes into that to do a proper impression if that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and you can't see Airsoft for just being Airsoft. It's reenacting. And there's no good enough. It's either, this obviously depends on how in-depth you want to be in with this. Like, I know I want to be perfect in pretty well every way I can with terms of the kit and understanding the kit and wearing it and presenting it accurately. So I don't see it's just Airsoft as a valid argument, but, other people do. I mean, go on the Airsoft subreddit and you see people that are just like, all right, this is good enough, and it, gets like thousands of upvotes. When I'm looking at it, I'm like, white t-shirt? I don't think so, bud.
Yeah, that's right.
Double buckle boots? I don't think so.
So when it comes to creating your kit and thinking about specifically your paratroop impression, what is the thing you learned that you didn't have any idea before you started looking at this kit? You really didn't realize, and when you found out, it sort of like totally blew you away.
That's a difficult question. Honestly, I think the Denizen smock.
Really?
Well, one, besides being one of the coolest garments ever made, which it totally is, there's so much that goes into it. This isn't really in terms of historical credibility, I suppose. It's more in terms of modern reproductions. That's kind of what I learned, that there's quality and then there's quality. I mean, Soldier of Fortune, What Price Glory, they all do Denizen smocks, but they don't do them correctly. You have to go to the bespoke people like Frank Brown or Steve Kittle, who I bought my smock from, to learn that these are, handmade garments just like they were, which also kind of brings out this other side of reenacting that's, I think, really not talked about at all, and that's the fabrication of these original garments.
So are you a reenactment hipster then, with your bespoke garments?
Yes. In a word, yes. People like Frank Brown and Steve Kittle, especially with the Denizen smocks, which they specialize in, they have taken the time to get the accurate colors for the hand-painted very first 1942 to 1943 Denizen smocks. So they have the appropriate beige color, they have the appropriate light green, light brown, dark brown, applied in an accurate manner with appropriate fasteners, so like Nui press studs and like a flash or lightning zipper. All these details that replicate what were done during the Second World War, 1942 to 43, that show like there was imperfections in the seams and stuff. Every smock is individualized, and there's no like repetition or anything of patterns or overlays because it's done by hand. And that's kind of one thing that I've learned that does translate into the historical aspect of it, but it also translates into a modern context where this is being handmade by individuals just like it was way back when.
So I guess that adds to the sort of historicity of it and to the enjoyability of the garment.
Definitely. It's one of those things that's like, it's not talked about because no one really gives it a second thought. They just talk about vendors and they say like, oh, he does a good garment, but they don't really think about what makes it good. You know what I mean? It's like, sure, you can use if you're doing an M43 jacket for the U.S. Army, you have to get like Teflon like fabric and you have to have that appropriate sheen and stuff, but nobody really looks at that and says, taking it for what it is, like that's a very high quality replication of this garment. Like this is pretty impressive. And that's one thing that I kind of learned throughout my journey of getting to where I am now with my kit. It's that like it did blow me away that these are things that people do make, and it's very small batches, and obviously they're very expensive because the quality of the item, the number 4 drill fabric that they use is expensive, the dye that they use, the original fasteners are expensive, and just the overall construction and labor that goes into it is expensive.
One supposes that, hand dyeing and hand painting fabric is probably both a skill set for which you can charge and labor intensive.
Definitely. And I mean, it's one of those things that I thought like that would be fun to try. So as a result of that, like I've begun sewing, and I've loved doing it, and I really want to make a first pattern hand painted Denizen smock. So it did kind of blow my mind that this is something that people spend a lot of time and effort in trying to get the most perfect reproduction.
And there's also techniques and things that they would have done back in the day that you mentioned that you're learning about too. You mentioned at the start you CC2'd your M42 jacket, right?
Yeah, well, it's not just the jacket, it's the whole uniform. So prior to the invasion of Normandy, the 101st and 82nd had their uniforms CC2'd, which is an anti-gas treatment that was done, just applied. They were just dunked in a barrel full of the CC2 chemical, whatever. And it stained their uniform into this very dark, kind of like rigid type material that does away with the loose fitting floppy kind of denim that the original garment was. So in a way to put off this accurate impression that I'm going for with the 101st D-Day impression, the uniform needs to be CC2'd. So obviously I don't have access to CC2, nor would I want to have access to it because it's a chemical and I'd rather not be sweating into a chemical. So there's means that reenactors use to put off that impression to give it that much more credibility. So they use things like Vaseline. They use things like what I use, paraffin wax, which is just candle wax that's been melted and applied by brush onto the garment. It's very labor intensive, and it's not that rewarding. I'll tell you that right now. It's you're wearing a wax garment head to toe, so it's like you got nowhere for that moisture to go. So
Yeah, it really helps it breathe, right?
yeah, really.
You also mentioned applying Blanco to your paratroop impression in particular.
Yeah. So what that is, Blanco, it's a cleaning powder it doesn't really clean the equipment. It's just done to dull the shine of the khaki color that the webbing was originally, because they didn't use dyed webbing during the Second World War until the 44 pattern equipment, where you get already green webbing. That's done in like the appropriate KG3 kind of category of green, which is what late war Northwest Europe Commonwealth forces had applied to their webbing. Well, unless they're like a commando unit, in which case they would have their equipment blackened. But Blanco is done to dull the equipment to the shade of green so it better blends in, so it's not like this bright khaki color.
So we kind of talked about some of your surprises. I want to go sort of the other direction. What is the worst piece of your paratroop impression to wear? What is the part that every time you put it on, like you're like, oh, not this?
The webbing.
The webbing, really?
Oh my god, yeah. I hate the webbing. It's so not comfortable. It's hard original webbing. So it's stiff. It's, it doesn't bind well. I can't lift my arms over my head, really. Especially when the small pack's applied to it. It's like, oh my god, like, are you kidding me? It's like 70 pounds. Like, it's not fun to wear, but it's important to wear, I think. It's constricting. It's hitting the deck is difficult, especially getting up.
And they had to fight in that stuff back in the day.
Yep. So I like that. That's an appreciation that nobody that hasn't worn that kit can understand, I think.
Yeah.
And so, do you think that it will get better sort of over time as you wear it in, for better than a...
The Pattern 37 equipment from original sources was actually kind of like despised with the troops because it's not comfortable. And it's, the Americans definitely had the best system for webbing, I think, in the Second World War.
So my first exposure to reenactment actually came way before I actually knew you or your dad. There was a guy, an airsofter in town, his name was Billy, and he was really into, again, 101st Easy Company because, Band of Brothers, all this kind of stuff. He had a bunch of reproduction items. So he got a Kit Kat bar from the store, but then he rewrapped it in a label that he had printed himself. And it was very rudimentary, but I remember having conversations with him because at the time I didn't really understand. Mm-hmm. And he basically summed it up by saying, if I can feel even 2% of what they would have felt back then that's where my mind, that's why I'm doing it.
Yep.
And my question for you is, when you put on this 70-pound kit and it sucks, how does that make you feel?
Oh, it makes me feel great. I love it. I really do love it. Maybe not in the moment, but in hindsight, like when people ask me about the kit and I can tell them accurately that this is what this is for and this is what that is and this is why this is the way it is. I've educated somebody. I've suffered the way that they suffered, and I look the part. And I think those are the three biggest things that any reenactor will tell you that kind of motivates them to continue.
And what do you think that does to your perspective?
Oh, I'm extremely humbled by it. Like, the fact that these fellows did this at my age, like, and younger, and a bit older, it's very awe-inspiring that they were in that good of physical shape to carry that kit, conduct the missions that they did, and, sustain the injuries that they did, that, like, on the airsoft battlefield, I am never, ever going to experience. So it's very humbling, and, it's a completely different perspective that I would not have had if I had just stuck my nose in books and read about it.
And I think it probably lends itself to the fact that, one of the things we all play airsoft for, whether we necessarily think about it or not, is for the fun of telling stories about the stuff we've done afterwards. So it definitely benefits you there too, right?
Definitely. I can probably tell you right now that I have the most unique experience of playing airsoft when I'm in my Second World War kits. Not in terms of gameplay. I mean, obviously that's a given. But in terms of player interaction and dealing with people and stuff like that, it's very, very different.
So my last question for you, John, for our listeners and the people on YouTube who are checking this out, they're interested in reenacting, and maybe they're in the same situation that you are, which is to say that there is not a very large reenactment community in their area, or the reenactment community that exists in their area is not really what they want to do. It's a Civil War reenactment community and they want to do Vietnam, or it's a World War II reenactment community and they want to do Korean War. So there's not really a large community for some. I'm sure that that's the case for a lot of people listening. What is your advice to them?
Well, I'm coming from this perspective that I'm the only dude here besides Pat, once he gets his stuff figured out, that does a Second World War reenactment. So honestly, it's the pros that I see to it are, and the things I want to get out of it are, I mean, personal in terms of the experience of wearing the kit, but also educating people on it. I would just say keep going with it. It doesn't matter that nobody's wearing the same impression that you're wearing. If you're doing Second World War at USGI and there's a fellow over across the way who's doing Second World War German, that's fine. I would, by doing and wearing the kit, you get people interested in that kit and that specific aspect of history because they can see it, they can talk to you about it, and they feel comfortable. If you're friendly, I mean. If you're juice arse about it, then like nobody's really going to come up to you and ask about it and not really be motivated to conduct any research of their own.
So what you're saying is that if I'm wearing my World War II kit, once I get it together, I need to have coffee before I show up to the game so that I don't scare people again.
You know, you need coffee there anyways. I need you to be productive on the field there, Skippy.
That's true.
Touche.
There's people that will inevitably become interested in reenacting through your participation in that community. It's just about being a good sport about it. Don't get demoralized or feel like, I'm not gonna have anybody to be buddy with in my kit. I mean, you have friends that play Airsoft, 9 chances out of 10. Other than that, it's just about being open and taking questions and doing the research and motivating people to start joining that community, like I did with Pat.
Makes sense, yeah.
So John, thanks so much for joining us today. It's really cool to hear more about sort of what goes behind the reenacting, the impression kits. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We got nothing else for you. See you later.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.